Welcome back, everyone, to Montgomery County, Maryland's Engage at Home, brought to you by the county's Caregiver Support Program. Today's episode is focused on caregiver supports and specifically how to address some of the challenges that many of you may be facing. Our guest today is Aaron Blight. Aaron, welcome, and please fully introduce yourself.
Hi, Lily. I'm super excited to be here with you today. Thank you for having me. And I just wrote a new book for family caregivers. It's called When Caregiving Calls, Guidance as You Care for a Parent, Spouse, Aging Relative. It just came out last week, so I'm super excited to be with you today. And in terms of my background, I know that you are with the Area Agency on Aging in Montgomery County. I'm on the advisory board of the Shenandoah Area Agency on Aging in my community where I live in the northern Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And I teach some classes at Shenandoah University, but I've spent my career in healthcare and caregiving. I used to work at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I owned a home care company here in my local area. And I've also studied caregiving as a phenomenon of social science. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a doctor of learning, but my studies have really focused on the context of caregiving. And so I'm really excited to be able to share some of the things that I've learned with people through my book. And I've also been a family caregiver. For 5.5 years, we took care of my mother-in-law. She had cancer. And that really is what caused me to pivot in my career and change direction and brought me to this point where I'm very passionate about trying to help family caregivers.
Thank you, Aaron. And it's terrific to have you here today. I know that there is so much that our audience is going to learn from you and your experiences. So you talk about your own experiences of being a caregiver and how that has definitely influenced your journey towards publishing this book. Could you tell us a little bit more about really what has been that journey for you?
It was a little over 20 years ago. I was at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services in Maryland. I was at the national level in the federal Medicaid program, and I worked in the Disabled and Elderly Health Programs group of Medicaid. But if I'm being honest with you, Lily, I didn't really understand a lot about what it meant to be elderly or disabled at that time in my life. But all of that changed very, very suddenly when my mother-in-law was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She was only 59 years old. And she was given just a few weeks to live. They recommended that she have brain surgery at Johns Hopkins University. So of course she did that. And there were all kinds of release forms that were signed to go under the knife and cut her brain, cut open her skull. And it was just a very traumatic thing for us. After the brain surgery, she moved into our home. And she was supposed to stay with us just for a couple weeks during her recovery from her brain surgery. She ended up far outliving the doctor's projections. She stayed in our home for a couple of years, and the cancer went into remission. She went through radiation, chemotherapy, a second brain surgery while she lived with us. And then when the cancer went into remission, she moved out of our home and into her own place, but she was never able to live, entirely alone. We were always going over there to help her. She lived for a total of 5.5 years after that original diagnosis, which was miraculous. But this was also a period of slow cognitive decline, and her brain was never the same. It was continuing to deteriorate, and so we were her family caregivers. And a year after she passed away, I changed my career because of our experience with my mother-in-law, and became the owner of a home care company, trying to help families that were just like mine. And over the course of time, I was able to help a lot of families. I saw families experiencing the same types of challenges that we had as family caregivers, and trying to help older adults through the waning days of their lives. And then I went back to school, and I decided to study caregiving in connection with my doctoral degree. And honestly, Lily, it was through the research about caregiving and what it means to both the caregiver and the care receiver. And it started to illuminate and help me to understand why caregiving was so hard for me when I was doing this with my mother-in-law. It really just, it was revelatory. It changed my whole perception of caregiving, and changed how I led my company and how I tried to work with families. So when 3 years ago, I received an unsolicited offer to sell my business. And I wasn't planning to do that, but after some soul searching, I decided to do that, and kind of asked, well, what do I do now after selling that home care business? And ultimately that led me to do what I'm doing today, to try to support caregivers everywhere, and also brought to the realization of this book.
Thank you, Aaron. That is an amazing story. And it's one that really, I can see, provides you with a lot of insights that's gone into your book, and that you have for family caregivers. Would you mind sharing now some of what you have learned?
So in the book is comprised of 18 chapters that all touch upon things that are very common in the caregiving experience. The chapters include things about, one chapter is about relationship, the relationship between the caregiver and the care receiver, and how the historic family relationship will change due to the introduction of caregiving tasks. When a family member starts taking care of their loved one, the things that they're doing with their loved one will be different. The dialogue between the two will change. And the way that one thinks about oneself in that relationship will also be different. And this is some of what I learned in studying research in applied gerontology, and how caregivers come to understand and accept their changing roles in that relationship. Another thing that I talk about in the book is how extended family relationships can also be affected by caregiving. There's the caregiver, maybe the primary caregiver, and the loved one, the family member who's receiving the care, but there are always other family members in the periphery who are influential in the care experience that happens. Another chapter in there is about stress. And as we know, especially here during 2020, Lily, with COVID-19, caregivers are under a lot of stress. I think, caregiving introduces a new type of stress into your life before COVID-19, but now with the potential exposure to infection from COVID-19 and the risks that are associated with that, to the care receiver especially, that just raises the level of stress and anxiety that caregivers feel. So the book talks about a little bit about that and how you can help to address the stress in your life associated with caregiving. There's a chapter on work. A lot of caregivers are working, and they're trying to juggle the demands of both working and caregiving at the same time. And caregivers should not feel like work and caregiving are mutually exclusive ideals, but sometimes they feel like that's the case. Sometimes their employer is not so understanding about their caregiving situation. And so the book tries to elevate the awareness of the plight of family caregivers who are employed full-time. There's a chapter on loneliness, on emotion, on home, on independence. And There's a chapter on faith as well. And so, all of these things are important and relatable, I think, to caregivers. Anyone who reads this, I think, can really understand and appreciate and gain new insights about what they're experiencing. But let me just say this one other thing, Lily, about the book. As I was writing it, I was really trying to think about how can this book be more meaningful and impactful for family caregivers. I wanted to write a book that was a little bit more than just informational, but I wanted it to be a book that could be transformational for caregivers. And this is where my doctoral degree entered the picture, because as I said, my degree is actually in learning, adult learning, and the way that we as adults process our experiences and gain new insights and change. And so I wanted to write a book that would help caregivers change and improve their lives as caregivers. And so I included, after every chapter, questions for reflection are designed to allow the caregiver to think about what they just read in the chapter, but to apply it to their own personal caregiving situation, and to think more deeply about what is the significance of this particular issue in my life and in my loved one's life. And that process of deep reflection is the gateway to learning and new insights. And at the end of the book, if the caregiver takes those questions seriously and actually, records some of their thoughts and feelings. This is a very private thing. It's not something that the caregiver needs to broadcast at all. It's a learning process. But at the end of the book, they're invited to go back and review everything that they've reflected upon and identify their next steps, to prioritize their action, so that they can approach caregiving in the future in a little bit more proactive way, in a way that will make caregiving a little bit easier for them. And caregiving is, by its very nature, reactive. It's hard. It's not going to be a cakewalk. But there are things that you can do as a caregiver that will make your life better and will make things better for your loved one as well. And I know that caregivers who go through that process in reading the book are going to gain some transformative insights about their caregiving experience.
Thank you. And I really understand what you mean about that need for opportunities for transformation, that so many caregivers are stuck in the tasks and the side effects that come from those tasks. They start to lose themselves and unfortunately lose their way to how to actually live a full life. And it seems that what you're talking about is that you are really wanting the caregiver to reflect and create those opportunities that provide gateways into their own stress relief, but also maybe new ways of living their lives.
Absolutely. You're exactly right, Lily. That's what I think the book enables a caregiver to do. And one chapter in there that I did not mention is about rewards. There are a lot of rewards that are associated with caregiving, and I think that in the literature we do not focus on those enough. There's a lot of research on caregiver burden, caregiver stress, things like that. But caregivers who go through this process find some deep and profound rewards associated with their experience. And the book really helps the caregiver to identify some of those things as well, because you can learn a lot about yourself, a lot about your loved one, and a lot about life and being a human being through caregiving. And those are unexpected lessons that often arise when you're involved in caregiving.
obvious that you have utilized a lot of your own personal experiences of caregiving plus your education to really capture what some of those challenges are for caregivers. Would you mind sharing something from your own experiences that help illustrate that?
Absolutely, Lily. I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this, but I share this because I know that it's something that family caregivers experience as well. And, you know, when my mother-in-law was in our home and we were providing ongoing care for her 24/7, I felt very conflicted about the whole situation. On the one hand, I really wanted to be there for my mother-in-law, and I wanted to rally around her and support her and give her everything that she needed during her battle with cancer. But at the same time, I had some resentment about it, and kind of some pent-up emotions that I just kind of suppressed, but they caused me to feel a lot of anxiety and guilt. You know, if I resented her for being there, then I felt guilty about it. And so I just had this constant turmoil of emotions. And the longer that she was there, the more conflicted I became about it, because, you know, there's no end date for caregiving, right? You don't know how long it's going to happen. And in many ways, you put your life on hold to provide the support that your loved one needs. And, you know, I would go to work, and I'd come home from work after a long, hard day at the office and sit down at the dinner table, and my mother-in-law would sit directly across from me every single night. And I became resentful about that. I just wanted to have time with my nuclear family, you know, with my wife and my children. I didn't want my mother-in-law there with me all the time. And it got to the point that I couldn't even look at her. Like at dinner, I would just look down at my plate and I would just quietly eat in silence like this. And I would never look up because she was there. And that's not a way to eat dinner with your family, but that's kind of how things progressed for me. And there was only one other time in my life when I wasn't able to look at someone, and it was a situation where a person that I'd given a lot of trust to in my business betrayed that trust, and I fired that employee. You can't fire your mother-in-law, right? So that was profound for me to realize how conflicted I was, how emotional I was, how this was affecting me. And in research later, years later, as I studied caregiving, I began to really understand why I had that type of response to the whole situation. And honestly, if I was to do this again for my mother-in-law, I would be a much, much better caregiver today. But I don't have that opportunity. She's gone. And so I'm honored to be able to try to share this with other caregivers in hopes that they'll maybe do a little better job than I did.
And thank you for being so frank, because those are the similar experiences that so many people face. And it's that conflict, that mixture of anger, but also then beating yourself up for actually having those feelings. It is one of the complex parts of being a caregiver. And it seems that you are really trying to put forward an experience through your book, through the work that people can do in there, to help them find a better way, a better journey for themselves.
Absolutely, that's exactly.
Yeah. So we're getting near the end of our interview. I know that you have so much that you can share. Piece of advice or insights would you like to have it that our audience start to think about?
One thing that I would like to share with your audience, Lily, is that if you're a caregiver, you don't have to do this alone. And a lot of times family caregivers feel like they have to shoulder everything on their own because of their family relationship with their loved one, their commitment to their loved one, their love for their loved one. They have a duty and a responsibility to care for their loved one, and they think that if they ask for help, that it's a sign of weakness, or they don't love their loved one enough, or they don't want to burden somebody else with the challenges that they have. But that's something that caregivers need to abandon, and they have to be willing to receive help. And there's really a couple of ways to do that. One is to receive help with the tasks of caregiving for their loved one. It's okay to outsource some of the tasks of caregiving if you can't do it all by yourself. The care-related needs of your loved one can become all-consuming, and in certain environments there are teams of people who take care of a single individual, and if it's very hard for one person to do it all. The second way that they might get help is for themselves, meaning if you need someone to give you some emotional support, seek out that type of support. That could be a good friend, a trusted friend who will listen and just be your cheerleader. Or it could be a caregiver support group where there are other caregivers who are going through similar experiences, and you're able to listen to one another and share ideas and have empathy for one another's situations. And those support groups, I think that through Montgomery County, you guys have those types of opportunities. They also can be online in different online forums these days. Also, licensed mental health professionals are available to help a caregiver. Counselors or psychologists can help you to process those complex emotions that you were talking about earlier, and to really get to a point where you're able to manage this situation much better emotionally. So seeking help when you need it is really important for caregivers, and I would really encourage them to do that.
I'm glad that you shared that advice, because that is really some of the most fundamental things that we try to share with caregivers. That whether it is a family, a friend, whether you bring in a service provider, whether you connect with the county, by creating that circle of support around both your loved one and yourself, this journey of caregiving is going to be a little easier. That's really it. It's a little easier. So we've got to the end of this terrific interview. We've had a little bit of a rough connection, but that's the way of the world at the moment. But I know that the words that you have shared, the philosophy that you have shared, is going to really hit home to people. So before we sign off, any final words of wisdom?
Well, I'd just like to thank you, Lily, for having me today. And I'd like to thank your listeners for listening to this show today. It's really been an honor and a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So this has been another episode with Engage at Home. If you live in Montgomery County and you require assistance because you are caring for someone, please contact us on 240-777-3000. So as you go on your day, please remember to stay healthy and calm.